Radio check. Anybody copy? Puglugifsi. Hello, everyone. I'm Alice Kaniklen, and this is episode 8, Raised in the Village, on Kuperlu Kwaarlu, or Coffee and Kwak. Coffee and Kwak is a podcast I created to celebrate and explore contemporary native life in urban Alaska. Coffee represents our contemporary and woke side, and Kwak represents examining our topics through an Alaska Native lens. This episode, Raised in the Village, is the first of 2 Coffee and Kwak conversations, Coffee and Kwak conversations, I've had with non-Native people who have grown up in rural Alaska to explore or perhaps better understand the non-Native experience of growing up in Native communities. This episode focuses on Tiffany Rosamond Creed, a pensive creative writer who has had her amazing work featured in several local publications. So be sure to check out her bio on the Coffee and Kwak website. She grew up in Kotzebue and still lives there today, but luckily I caught her on one of her weekends passing through Anchorage.
I wish I could just tell people, like, when you come in, there's going to be things that you don't understand, and you don't have to make yourself comfortable. You don't have to, like, immediately understand them and have your take on it and share that with other people. Mm-hmm. You could just, like, sit with it for a while. I mean, I feel like that's almost like a value, is just sitting with something for a while. And if it clashes with your worldview that you had before, why don't you just adapt to your worldview rather than saying, like, this doesn't agree with what I've always thought, you know?
Mm-hmm. Tiffany and I sat down with Jackie Igluguk Lambert, who you might remember from episode 4, and kicked off our interview with a few rapid-fire questions to get to know Tiffany a little bit better. We busted out the muktuk, cracked open a beer, and jumped right in. Coffee or Kwak?
Coffee.
Overcast and warm, or sunny and windy?
Sunny and windy.
Blueberries or upbeaks?
Blueberries.
Four-wheeling or snowmobiling? Oh. Snow machining. Excuse me, why did I say that?
Oh my God.
I wrote snow machining.
It's called coding. My sister's been living in...
Code switch.
Yeah. My sister's been living in Utah, and she was, like, telling me the story, and she's like, and then we went snowmobiling, and I was like, excuse me? It's like, you need to come home. Just, and then at the same time, snow machine, like, snow going or brapping or whatever. Anyways, I choose brapping.
You can brap both ways.
All right, true. Okay. Snow go.
Good point,
Snow
Jack.
machining.
Okay, snow machining.
Yeah.
Tang or Kool-Aid?
Tang.
Ooh, Android or Apple?
Apple.
Not cool.
I know, I saw your green texts. I was like, She either has iMessage off or it's an Android. I always end up dating guys that do Androids. I don't know what that says about me, but...
Have they worked out?
No.
Not particularly?
We'll see.
Maybe that's what it says about you.
Yeah. We'll see.
Okay, last one. Spring or fall?
Fall.
Got it.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, my name is Tiffany Rosamond Creed. I'm from Kotzebue, or Kikiktugruk, Alaska. My Inupiaq name is Noyak. My Noyak.
Noyak?
Mm-hmm. Or, well, I was at Inupiaq class this morning, and I said Noyak, and then Edna was like, Naoyak? Naoyak?
Is it Naoyak?
I mean, yeah,
Seagull?
basically.
Yeah.
But it's Noyak.
In our dialect, it's Noyak. So
Yeah.
Your guys' ow is our o.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. My parents are John Creed and Susan B. Andrews. And my favorite native food is probably caribou soup. But I also love berries. I've kind of done a lot of different things for work, like in Kotzebue, like kind of worked in higher education, and I've worked in childcare and things like that. I also have been for the last several years working on a writing degree, and so it's interesting when I first introduce myself to people and they ask, what do I do for work? I feel like what they're really asking is, what do I do, like, what do I like to do, or what am I all about, kind of, and so I try to mention that too, that I'm a writer, even though that sounds weird to say or something. So yeah, so I'm a poet, creative writer.
Were you guys all born in Alaska and in Kotzebue?
Yeah, so me and Miles were both born in Fairbanks, and Dee Dee and Trevor were born in Anchorage, and it's just one of those, like, it's safer to have twins in Anchorage, for sure. And so there used to be a flight directly from Kotzebue to Fairbanks, and so they went and had me, my mom did, we'll give the credit where it's due, my mom had me in Fairbanks, and then immediately flew back to Kotzebue where they were already living. And so my dad always says, just say you were born and raised there, it's so much faster, but I feel like it's like lying or something, so I'm like, I was born in Fairbanks and immediately flew to Kotzebue. And it's such a weird thing too, because meeting people that are from the East Coast, they like, one of my friends didn't go on a plane till he was 18, and that's such a foreign concept to me, because you have to go on a plane if you live in rural Alaska.
The other part I wanted to catch is, like, what was your parents' story before you guys were born? Because they were already up there, right?
Yeah. So I feel like I say this so much, because I'm always looking for, like, a way to connect to somebody else or whatever, but I'm always like, my dad came to NOATAC in 1979 as a, like, school teacher. And this actually might connect to something later, because he had his very first kind of experience of somebody noticing his race, because he grew up outside of Boston. He was just like outside of his house or something, and somebody said, oh, it was something white man, and he had to be like, well, I am white, aren't I, or something, you know. And so, anyway, so my dad came up to NOATAC 1979 as a teacher, but he went down and met my mom, and then, like... Down to Oregon. Okay. Yeah, University of Oregon. They both were in a journalism program. And then went up to Fairbanks. We were both working at different forms of media outlets there. And then my dad got a job at the school district, I want to say, and this is what's crazy, is the apartment, not the apartment building, but the very apartment I'm living in now is the very first one they lived in when they were there. And it wasn't on purpose. It was just happened to be. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Damn, that's kind of creepy.
I know. I sometimes I just, like, hang out in my apartment, and I'm just sort of like, they were just here. What were they doing? It was like a 2-bedroom. They were couples. So I was like, this must have been their office or something, or their storage for all their junk. I don't know. But so my dad, they were apart just for a little bit because my dad was already living up there, and then he got a job at Chukchi campus as an English professor, and my mom was still in Fairbanks.
It's crazy to me. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
It's crazy to me how much you know your parents, like.
This is all
full story.
It's so recent. Like, I didn't know any of this stuff. When you're a kid, you take for granted. You're just like, they only exist to be my parents. You know, you're like, there was nothing before me. It's like that narcissistic, like, child thing or whatever. And so basically, like, moving back to Kotzebue and living with them, it's like all these connections all the time of, like, coming back after college and, like, having a little bit more of an adult view of things, like the.
But it's a really big value in Inupiaq culture is to know, like, where you come from, what happened, and everything like that.
Mm-hmm. In education, they say that, like, you should be a lifelong learner. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like being a lifelong learner, like, to, like, understand and know your community and your family, like, just making discoveries all the time and stuff. Like, it's such a good attitude to have towards it, to just be kind of fascinated. And sometimes they're not, they're painful things, too.
For me, I didn't really, as an Inupiaq person, and, like, Kotzebue is, like, majority Inupiaq or whatever, I never really considered myself a minority until I was an adult and was called one, because that's just how it was just, like, I was a majority. That was my worldview. And so I wanted to ask of, like, your earliest, like, realizations of your race identity and just compared to your classmates.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, because you're aware, but it's not like this, like, awareness where you know what that means, really. It's a norm, kind of. I sometimes get questions from people from, like, outside of Kotzebue or whatever, like, that are like, so what is it like? It's like to explain something that's so normal to you, but it sounds fascinating to other people, is, like, a very weird experience, because that was just my reality, and, like, kids probably aren't even developed or aware enough to know that's like to make meaning out of their reality as much. They're just sort of experiencing it and stuff. But we also, my family we had many different dimensions to even just our year. Like, we would go to Fairbanks in the summertime. That was just a totally different experience, kind of. And we would go to, like, all these kind of summer camps and everything. And because my parents were on an academic schedule, they could do that. And, I mean, our Fairbanks, like, that's a whole other story, because our Fairbanks existence was really funny, too, where we just, like, lived on this lot in a broken-down motorhome, like, next to the train tracks. And it was just very silly stuff with an outhouse and everything. It was almost, like, less bougie than our Kotzebue house. But, like, somehow. But then at the same time, Fairbanks is just, like, as much as it is native land, it's a very white space at this point, and the Kotzebue is a very native space. And so you, like, with that, and then we would travel around and, like, see family and stuff and whatever on the East Coast, or, you know, and so you get a sense for, like, that I had an awareness that there are different, like, spaces with different feels or something, and, like, there are different experiences people are having. But that's one of almost the frustrations of in retrospect, of my youth, is that I didn't know about racial equity type of things, and I didn't have the vocabulary for it or really the awareness of it until college, because that's when those conversations sort of happened. Depending on where you go to college, too. I went to, like, a place that sort of, and I almost catered that, or, like, I created that reality for myself because of what I was interested in. Those were the classes I would take that were very, like, we, like, confronted our privilege and all these things and talked about, you know, kind of like women's studies classes and stuff. So not everybody even has that experience at college. I thought that's just what college was. Mm-hmm. I was like, this is where you, like, deconstruct everything. But some people go to college and they kind of continue constructing onto what is already the power structure or whatever. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was like this sort of deconstruction in certain classes, to just think that I didn't know that. I didn't know how to talk about that, or maybe I wasn't the best ally or something. I don't really like that word, but, like, the best ally, until I had the kind of aha moments in college or something. Kind of makes me feel sad for, like, it's not that I was going around like a little, like, 8-year-old tyrant being, like, racist to everybody, but as a person with privilege, you benefit from racism, you know? And, like, my experience of living in Kotzebue is and was so different from the people that were around me, and there were so many advantages that I had that I didn't really realize at the time. And so I don't know if there's just, like, a moment of, like, realizing my race or something, the way that my dad did that story about going to No Attack. And it's just interesting, too, because I think, like, you're the catalyst for this, like, episode about somebody's maybe really hurtful experience, or more just extreme experience or something. I'm kind of, like, surprised by that, because I didn't have that experience really, like, unless everybody's doing it behind my back. But I didn't have that experience of, like, being white minority or anything in any way that was, like, I would be so hurt from, or so. I was surrounded by just love and community and, like, support, and, like, sometimes people ask about that too, because they're maybe looking for an answer that will make them feel justified, that, like, if there's a white minority, then the exact thing would happen to them that has happened to actual minorities. Mm-hmm. But I almost lean into this, like, no, I'm more than okay, A, because of my advantages, and B, because my community didn't have ugliness towards me, like, didn't have, I mean, they were just, like, individuals, but that was, sometimes I think about it and I'm like, were you bullied in middle school because you were white, or because you were the hugest dork ever? And I'm like, it's because, like, you were the hugest dork ever, like, let's be real. And so, like, I was the kid that'd be like, we have homework or whatever, and so, of course, I almost deserved it, you know, but, you know, there's, like, little things that, like, when people ask about, like, Brene Brown says, like, when you ask people about love, they tell you about pain. And so, like, I feel like when I first, like, read your questions, I thought of some painful moments or something, and like little hurts or whatever that don't compare to actual marginalization, but just little hurts. And then I realized that I was